Hey everybody, it's Charles, your hobby hero, and today we're going to be covering the PPG Top 8 from the Denver, Colorado series. This was a tournament that was held this past weekend on September 2nd with a total of 37 people. We're going to be looking at the top 8 deck list. I'll be giving you my evaluations of those lists as well as linking all the deck lists down below if you guys want to build those and test them yourself. Before we get started though, if you have not already, please hit that subscribe button. I do appreciate it. We have added almost 400 subscribers since Gen Con, so very excited to have you guys. We're also having a giveaway on the channel when we hit 500 subscribers. If you guys want to go check that out and get entered there as well. And without further ado, let's go ahead and jump right in. And of course, leave it to Disney to have a top 8 that is as diverse and inclusive as it possibly could be, unless you're Sapphire, with a total of 6 different ink combinations represented in the top 8 and a variety of different deck lists even among the colors that are similar. We'll go ahead and start with our first place list. Alright, first deck list we're going to look at is the Anthony King Amber Steel deck that ended up winning the overall tournament. Very low cost deck here, as you can see. Tons of 1-drops and 2-drops, very little on the top end. He's got Lilo in the 1-drop spot, Stitch maxed out in the 1-drop spot, Captain Hook maxed out in the 1-drop spot. He's got Goons at 3 of, just to keep it under 60 cards, or keep it right at 60 cards rather. Simba for the cantrip and another 1-drop here. The bigger Simba with Bodyguard at a 4 of. Prince Eric here at a 4 of as well. Very good in the aggro matchups. That 3 willpower and being able to challenge 4/3. Now Ariel, now this is a card that I've talked about on the channel before. Definitely does not get enough attention. Coming in at 3, she's a 2/3 for 1 lore generation. Very similar stats to Maleficent, actually a little bit higher on the willpower. Like Maleficent, she kind of replaces herself in her hand with this musical debut. Looking at the top 4 cards of your deck, you may reveal a song card and put it into your hand. Now, it can obviously miss, where Maleficent's ability will never miss, but it allows you to kind of search for best of option out of that top 4. As we get into kind of the songs that she has access to in the deck, we'll kind of talk about that a little bit. And then she also has this Singer 5, which is super relevant on turn 4. It allows you to get to your 5-drop songs very effectively. So this card right here really is an MVP of this deck. It has ticked up a little bit in price since this debut, but I do still think this card is super undervalued for a super rare. Next up, we've got 3 copies of the Little Tink, 4 copies of Stitch Rockstar, 3 copies of the Big Tink, obviously to control the board as best as can, shift up from the little Tinkerbell there. He has 4 copies of Smash, went the route of having an inkable option instead of the Fire of the Cannons being uninkable. And then we have our song package at 12 songs total, 4 copies of Be Our Guest, which can help get to your Stitch, or just be another target to hit that is inkable off of her search if you miss on your other 2. But your big 2 here is going to be A Whole New World and Grab Your Swords at a 4 of. Rounding out the list with a Lantern here as a 3 of. I think 3 of is the right answer. You really do want this card out, but you really don't want it in multiples. 3 seems to be the magic number. You're still going to get it in multiples from time to time, but you want to make sure that you have the best opportunity to get at least 1 in that opening hand. Now this deck is a very high roll deck. I actually have an Amethyst list that's very similar in build to this. It's got a little bit more card draw in it, obviously, but this one has access to those 5-drop songs, which makes it really good as well. Now, I do like this deck. It is very, very aggressive, which allows you to just absolutely take over the board by like turn 5, which gets under cards like Be Prepared, which are huge detractors for the aggro metagame. This deck really doesn't care about that card too much because it's usually won by that point. The one big glaring weakness in this deck is very, very dependent on this Rockstar Stitch draw engine, the Adoring Fans down here, which allows all these 1-drops that you have in the deck to cantrip or draw and replace themselves as you're playing them, to go very wide. Without it, the creature quality or character quality in the deck is actually pretty low. He actually omits playing a lot of the 2 lore generating 2-drops like LeFou and Aladdin in hopes of just being able to go and consistently go wider on those other ones. That's probably the first thing I would look at in the deck, is possibly losing some of like the goons here and trying to get in either Aladdin or LeFou, depending on what you think you're going to encounter as far as sweepers go. The Tinkerbells are nice for the mirror, being able to play her on 3 and her on 4. However, her as a 6-drop is pretty bad in the deck, but obviously worked out for him in this particular scenario. One thing to keep in mind, though, is Lantern does reduce the cost of the shift of both Tinkerbell and Stitch, which allows Stitch to come down theoretically on turn 3 for that very, very aggressive start for that one. Next one up is our second place list here. This is a Ruby Amethyst control list. We've got 3 copies of Archimedes, 1 copy of Sergeant Tibbs. I don't know why he didn't just go with 4 of one or the other. There's no real reason to it. In case you were also wondering yourself, there's nothing that affects Storyborn or Dreamborn or red or purple characters specifically. So just wanted to change it up a little bit, I guess. He does have 3 copies of Broom, 4 copies of Gaston. He did only opt for the 3 copies of Rafiki, 4 copies of Maleficent. I don't think you're going to see very many decks that run Amethyst that aren't running 4 copies of Maleficent, but it is there. Now we've got Aladdin here as a 4 of, obviously as a target to shift up into the big Aladdin. Jafar, Keeper of Secrets. This one has a 1 of. Actually, a lot of these Amethyst lists were opting to play Jafar. I will say I have not personally tested him, but I've been very underwhelmed by when my opponents play him. Generally, he's maybe a 3 or 2 strength character, depending on what stage of the game is. Very rarely is he anything much larger than that. And I don't know that this deck really needs a 2 lore generating 2/5. But again, a lot of these lists have been playing it. If you've had a different experience in testing, let me know. Obviously, he has the potential to go crazy, maybe as a counter tech for the steel decks that are playing a whole new world. They play their whole new world, and then you have a big 7 power character to challenge on turn 4. But again, I'm not entirely sure that's something that the deck really needs. He's got 2 copies of Wayward Sorcerer Mickey Mouse. Have seen him in more of the control lists now. They are... I like this card, and I like its synergy with the brooms, what the brooms can do. I don't really like it for the reason why it's getting included in a lot of these decks, which is kind of the anti-decking yourself tech, being able to shuffle cards back in to help reduce the amount of, or reduce the chances of you decking yourself out. Now, obviously, like in the mirror match and in the mill matchup, there are going to be lots of cards drawn, and that can be a problem, but there's only a limited number of opportunities for you to activate this anyways. Even if you get Sorcerer Mickey out and the brooms, you have to have something for the brooms to be challenging into in order to be recycling them. Now we're talking about having 2 cards in play and your opponent just letting you challenge into them with it, which if they're trying to mill you out, they're just going to stop giving you opportunities to challenge with those brooms. Brooms are only, single lore generators, and you're really not going to be able to quest too often with Mickey if that's your goal, because they'll just challenge him and knock him out. So, again, I do like it. I just don't know if I like it for the reason why he is seeing play in a lot of these control lists right now. They are opting for the 1 copy of the Queen. Seems like most people either love or hate this card. They either have her as a 1 of or as a 4 of. I honestly play her. There have been times where she has, been able to sit and play and draw me 3 or 4 cards, which feels amazing, but most often I just don't want to pay 5 for a 1 lore generator that is probably not going to do anything. This deck is usually playing a lot of other options on 5, so I don't hate this at 1 of, and it may honestly be a card that eventually just sees itself out of the deck, as it may just not have enough room to include her even as a 1 of any longer. And next up, we've got the Goofy as a 2 of. I've seen him in some of the lists. Just a hard to deal with character. He can't be challenged more or less by the typical characters that are getting played in the format. I don't know that there's a specific one of these characters that's any better or worse than the others. I've seen lists that are running Pongo to get him down a turn sooner and not kind of be competing with like the Dragonfire and Maui slot. This one is running him in the 5 slot instead, which I think is fine. Again, a little bit beefier stats in case you are playing against that steel player that's running like the Smash and the Tinkerbell packages. Maui, Hero to All, is a 4 of. No surprise there. One of the best removal spells in this deck. A singleton copy of Ursula. I do find that odd, especially in a list running more than 60 cards like this one. I just don't think you're very likely to see her very often, and I do think she is, when you want to see her, you want to see her. And there aren't a ton of matchups where she's bad on 7. They are running 4 copies of Aladdin at 7, though, so maybe they just felt like they had too many 7-drop options, even though ideally you're shifting Aladdin on 5. That just could be the reason for cutting her down as a 1 of. They are running the full 4 set of Elsa, Spirit of Winter. Not a whole lot of explanation needed for that. That is most of Amethyst's top end. They do have 2 copies of the Brave Little Tailor. Again, just another big evasive character. 4 lore generation can catch you up very quickly in some of those matchups. And again, at 5 toughness, it's very hard to take care of this character unless you just have a straight banish spell. And then 4 of the Maleficent. Again, this is a really, really expensive ink card. Most matchups are going to have this in their ink pool early on. If they do get up to 9, it is nice, but more often than not, this card will end up in your ink. But that's the nice part about it, is if you don't need it, you can use it to help get to some of your other threats. And if you do need it late game, she is an absolute monster. We get into our actions here. We've got 2 copies of Befuddle. It is no surprise, I am not a huge fan of Befuddle in this type of deck. These decks are very card hungry, and giving up a card for temporary tempo is probably just not good enough. Like, I just don't see a whole lot of options where, like, if I go first, I ink a card, my opponent draws, so they're already +1 card ahead of me. They play a 1-drop, and I untap, draw a card, and ink, and then play Befuddle. Like, they're up so many extra cards, and I may not have enough cards to ink after that point in time. Like, I don't like it, and a lot of times when I'm playing against it and they play it, like, it's a huge tempo drop for them over the long haul rather than anything else. Yeah, you can do some cute stuff like bouncing their blocker and attacking their 1-drop, but then their blocker's coming back again the next turn anyways, or possibly just later in the game when it's relevant again. And again, you'll more often than not end up missing that card. Dragonfire as a 3 of, I'm guessing just as a testament to how many uninkables are being ran in the deck, they have them as a 3 of, just instead of running the full 4 package. You've got the songs down here, no surprises here. 4 friends on the other side. It's inkable and draws 2 cards. Again, any Amethyst deck is basically running this as a 4 of. And then 4 Be Prepared. This is kind of your must-hit on 7 card for a lot of the aggro matchups in the field. So it is running it as a 4 of. And your items down here, you're going to see these items in a lot of the Amethyst decks. the Magic Mirror, the Ursula's Cauldron, the White Rabbit's Pocket Watch, and some combination or of numbers here. We got 3 Magic Mirror, 1 Cauldron, and 2 Pocket Watch here, and then 1 Shield of Virtue. These being inkable kind of allows them to just kind of be thrown in those rare circumstances that they become applicable. If you get an Aladdin down with the Shield of Virtue, feels really good. If you can establish a board presence with a Pocket Watch in play, giving all your characters rush for 1 additional is obviously really good as well. And again, if you don't end up needing them, you can just ink them at any point in time. I'm actually a big fan of the Cauldron in these control decks over the Magic Mirror, especially with the abundance of aggro decks in the format. I just don't feel like I ever want to pay this 4 to draw a card versus, you invest 2 once for the whole game and you're optimizing your draws for the remainder of the game with the Cauldron. So I do tend to favor the Cauldron over the Magic Mirror. But overall, this particular deck is one of the most popular decks in the format right now, the Ruby Amethyst Control. I am not as big a fan of it. I do think it struggles with a number of the more popular aggro decks, especially if those aggro decks have a good pilot behind them. I do think it is a good catch-all kind of deck if you don't know what kind of meta you're going into, what kind of skill level of players that you're going into. I do think that newer players or less experienced players are going to struggle with this deck pretty much anytime they see it. But I do think as players get better about recognizing the importance of certain turns and card advantage, etc., that this deck is going to become less popular, because I just think it's going to become a less effective overall strategy. All right, next up is Brooks Clark's Steel Amethyst list. This is a control list that I have been running, probably the most similar of the list at top 8 to what I'm playing currently on Pixelborn. He is running 4 of the Captain Hooks. It is a very good card to slow down aggro decks, as it trades evenly with Simba, and it trades evenly with a lot of the 3-drops that the aggro decks are playing as well. He is running a 4 set of the brooms. I don't run the broom package in my particular build, as I just have other options as far as what I'm running in those slots. He is running 3 Elsa Snow Queen. Her ability does come up a little bit in some of these matchups, but it is more often there just so that she can come down earlier for the 8-drop shifting on 6. Again, 4 of Maleficent, not surprising there. He is running 2 copies of the Jafar. We already talked about him a little bit before. Not a huge fan of the Jafar, but he is in a lot of these Amethyst lists, so feel free to test him out. Let me know what you guys think of him yourself. He's running a full 4 set of the Mickey Mouse, so he is able to get this combo off quite a bit, I would imagine, with 4 of on both of those. Again, for those aggro matchups, being able to continuously stream those out could be very advantageous. Now, what I do find is odd is he elected to go the Captain Hook and Fire the Cannons route. And if you noticed in the 3-drop spot, we have no Rafikis. So I'm guessing just with those additional cards added in here, he didn't have room for any more uninkables, and Rafiki got the cut. It's hard to say what I think is going to be better over the long haul. Now, obviously, this is a 7-card package he has in here. He's got 4 Fire the Cannons as well, versus I think I'm running 3 Rafikis right now for that aggro matchup. So it's hard to say, which is going to be better or worse. I do like Rafiki personally for that aggro matchup, because he is normally going to be a 2-for-1 by himself. Whereas to get a 2-for-1 out of this deal, you're going to have played the Fire the Cannons, then played the Captain Hook to get the Fire the Cannons back, and hopefully had a favorable exchange in the process. But I can understand running this package over the other one as well. He's also not running Smash at all in this build, which I do find odd considering the desire to play the direct damage suite. You would think Smash would be in there as well, but again, it worked out pretty well for him. Hans, big fan of this Hans, being able to advance your win condition by questing and still be able to control your opponent's boards. There's a lot of 5 willpower characters that this guy can do 1 point of damage to before swinging in with like a Tinkerbell to finish them off, which is really nice as well. Being able to shoot Lilos behind a bodyguard, also very nice. Just a lot of good things that you can do with 1 point of damage, and the fact that you're questing for 2 while doing that is very nice as well. He is running the full 4 set of the Queen. I am going to imagine that in most matchups, this is going to be ink for him. You're obviously very rarely going to be in a situation where you're going to need 2 of these in play. So I think, just wanted to maximize seeing at least 1 copy of her by putting 4 in there and then just inking any additional copies past that. Similar with the Beast here, he is really committed to that break ability for the control matches that he's going to be going up against, running the full 4 set of Beast to blow up his opponent's items as he's coming into play. 4/4 for 2 lore is also not a bad character to get into play. If you're playing even against an aggro matchup, he should be able to trade pretty favorably in those scenarios. Big Tink here. It's important to notice he is not running the small Tink at all to shift up into her. I don't think I like that. Playing the Tink on 4 is absolutely huge in a lot of the explosive aggro decks that you're going to see in like the high level competitive play. Her ability to come in and not just do 1 damage for everybody, but then be able to sing, like grab your swords, or to challenge a character and take out another one, is absolutely huge in some matchups, and that's just not something that he's going to be able to do in this build. He is running the Pocket Watch down here, so she can come in and challenge on 7 in the turn she comes into play, but that is there's a big difference between 6 and 7, and there certainly is a huge difference between 4 and 7. So I don't, again, it clearly worked out well enough for him to top in this particular tournament, but not something I would advise most people to omit. If you like Tinkerbell's ability, it's probably worth having the small Tink in there as well. He is running 2 copies of Ursula. That's kind of what I've settled on as well in my particular build, is the 2 copies. I was running more at first, as the meta seemed to be kind of leaning more heavily towards the control matchups. I wanted to have a better top game or late game than most of the other decks that were out there. But we're starting to see a slide towards these aggro decks again. So I think 2 is probably the right number for Ursula. And he is running 3 copies of Elsa. And again, I would imagine just for the fact that he already had so many uninkables in the deck that he wanted to keep the uninkable top end stuff to a minimum, opting for 3 and hoping to see probably only 1 or 2 of them throughout the course of the game. We already talked about the Fire of the Cannons. Like I said, this is kind of his answer to the early game. He's not running a ton of early drops. No Prince Eric, no Archimedes. He's just running the 1-drop hook and the Fire of the Cannons with the big hook to get those back. For his songs, 4 of Friends on the Other Side, 4 of Grab Your Sword. No surprise there. Again, a big thing to keep in mind is, with songs like this one in particular, that these type of control decks really want to be singing these more than they want to be playing them. Setting up turns for, playing a Tink and singing a Grab Your Sword in the same turn is obviously just going to decimate your opponent's side of the board. Items, we kind of talked about these before. These you're going to see usually in some combination of decks. He's only got a singleton magic mirror for the control matchups that he's going into. And then he has 2 copies of the White Rabbit's Pocket Watch in order to give his characters rush. The next one up here, we've got Ryan Miles' Emerald Amethyst list. And look at that price tag right there, $205. That's about as budget of a competitive deck as you're going to find in this format. Now, truth be told, I had not tested this color combination very much, and there are some really odd choices in this build for sure. First and foremost is his inclusion of 1-drops. We have no 2/2s for 1s at all. We have the 1/3 Olaf at a 3 of, and the Pascal, which we have not really seen at all, as a 4 of. Pascal gaining evasive as long as you have another character in play. We are running a full suite of the Flynn Rider, probably the best, if not second best, 2-drop in the entire game. 2 lore generator, and the ability to make your opponent discard card for challenging him. 3 Megaras is very strange. I'm guessing it can set up some stuff with your evasive character challenging into like a Pongo, something along those lines. Not a card I have seen in constructed play yet, but I could see it creating some favorable trades. The fact that it's inkable whenever it's not going to be able to set up that favorable trade is nice as well. We've got 4 of Maleficent, no surprise there. Only 2 of on the Rafiki, which honestly, there's not a ton of uninkables in this one, so I am curious why he only opted for the 2 of. For the Rafiki, again, that card is just really, really good in the aggro matchups. Being able to attack a Simba bodyguard and still be alive to challenge you in the following turn is just really, really powerful in the format right now. But he does have him as a 2 of. Running 4 of Cheshire Cat and 4 of Jasper in that 3-drop spot. Both of these cards early on, I think, were very popular for Emerald. I think both of them have kind of fallen out of favor here recently. Cheshire Cat, on paper, looks very good and can set up some really awkward trades for your opponent, especially if you're seeing a lot of Ruby Amethyst control. Nothing really trades favorably in that deck with the Cheshire Cat, which is nice. But in your aggro matchups, a lot of times they're just going to be able to finish it off with whatever they want to finish it off with, to have his banish trigger. And then in your steel matchups, he can't challenge, so they can kind of just leave him out there to die from kind of all the residual damages coming from Hans, coming from Tinkerbells, coming from Grab Your Swords, and he can't really do much about it. Jasper, on the other hand, the ability to shut down your opponent's best quester is nice. You really do have to have a board presence to be able to do that, especially with the fact that he only has 1 lore generation. A lot of times, and 2 strength to boot, a lot of times people are just going to let him do his thing until they can either challenge him very favorably or remove him some other means. I think if he had had 2 lore generation or like 3 strength, this guy would probably be a very big staple in Emerald. But as his stats are as is, like his ability can be very good. More often than not, though, he's just not the card you want to see on turn 3. Peter Pans were kind of a weird inclusion again for me. Mostly that 1 lore generation just makes this guy not a huge threat, not something that has to be dealt with immediately. And then the fact that he only has 2 willpower means a lot of the splash damage kind of effects from a lot of these steel decks that are getting played are going to take him out as well. It's not a very short clock for your opponent, and probably not a card I would play in my list. He's only got him as a 2 of. I feel like this card's in here more as an ability to challenge other evasive characters, but I don't know that there's enough evasive characters in the meta right now to really warrant that kind of inclusion. Hans here, on the other hand, very good card. 3 lore generator at 4, the only one in the game currently. You can curve out into your lore generators into this guy is very, very strong. Similar with Tinkerbell, just kind of upgraded version of Peter Pan. 2 lore generation, that extra willpower make a huge difference and are well worth the additional cost to play. Big fan of this card in Emerald right now. And then, little known fact on her ability here too, this Pixie Dust. You can give that to your opponent's characters as well, which means you can give that to your opponent's bodyguard characters, and then since they have evasive, that negates their ability to bodyguard against characters without evasive. So that's kind of a nice little feature of the Tinkerbell as well. 5-drop Cusco. This is one of my favorite rares in the whole set. The ward on a 3 lore generator is absolutely bonkers. One of the closest things to a guaranteed 3 lore generation that we have in the game right now. On top of that, he also has a great secondary ability of that no touchy, which means whenever character challenges him and banishes him, it gets banished as well. With 4 willpower, they generally have to put some bigger characters on this guy. So the fact that you can come in, get 3 lore generation, and he's going to trade at least 1 character whenever he gets banished is extremely nice. Love this card. Should be in every single Emerald deck that's getting played. Similar to this guy right here, the other busted 5-drop in here, which is Mad Hatter. Same stat line, 2/4, 3 lore generator. So a 3 lore generator just can't be left alone for very long at all. But he's got the ability Tea Party. Whenever he is challenged, you may draw a card. On turn 5, there aren't a whole lot of options. I'm not going to say there are none, but there aren't a whole lot of options that trade 1 for 1 with this guy. So the ability to draw 1 card, sometimes 2 cards, is very nice. Or pulling your opponent's Dragonfire out of their hand for your 5-drop is also quite good as well. We got Genie on the Job as a 3-of. Really like this Genie. Again, similar to the Tinkerbell Evasive, we've got a 2 lore generator with Evasive. That extra willpower puts him out of range for a single smash as well, which gives him a little bit of an upgrade there. The Disappear can be super effective as well, depending on the matchup that you're going into. And keep in mind, this is a You May ability, and you can use it on your own characters too. So if you've got, one of your characters like a Cusco that's getting ready to die in an unfavorable trade, you got to use him once. They did 3 damage to him. They're going to be able to finish him off next turn. You can play your Genie, return Cusco back to your hand, and then the following turn you'll be able to play him with his ward and upstanding again for that guaranteed 3 lore again, which is very nice. And they have 3 copies of John Silver, which I'm happy to see this. I've played around with John Silver a little bit. He's not been great in the builds that I have. Honestly, the 6 is just hard to get into play. Genie is kind of the one exception to that, and I usually only go up to about 2 copies on him even. And there are times that I get stuck at 5 with only a Genie in my hand. So I would be cautious of putting more 6-drops in, especially 3 copies of them. But this card is great whenever it is in play. The fact that it comes into play and has an immediate effect, similar to the Disappear, he can shut down a character on turn 6 when he is played, which is nice. And then each turn, whenever he quests, he can continue to do it, which I am a big fan of, being able to quest for your win condition while stopping your opponent's win condition at the same time. Really do like this card. I'm willing to try it again, but I'm happy to see it in a top 8 deck list. He's got 1 copy of Befuddle, which is just really strange. I'm sure he has a very lengthy explanation for why 1 Befuddle is the secret answer. Again, less offensive in this deck because, again, this deck doesn't have a ton of uninkable cards in it. So playing an inkable card early on isn't the end of the world. It is playing all the draw cards too, so as long as you hit your draw cards after it's been played, that little bit of tempo, or targeted removal at the right time could be the difference between winning or losing a game. But I don't know why it's a 1-of. I feel like if it's good in the deck, you play more of it. If it's not good in the deck, you just don't bother with the 1 copy. But it may be his 4th copy of Mother Knows Best, since he's only running 3 here. Didn't want to run 4 uninkable copies, so just opted to go for a slightly downgraded version of it instead of running the full 4 set. Could be. Does have 4 copies of Friends on the Other Side, no surprise there. And then again, 3 copies of the Mother Knows Best for that tempo and bouncing. He does have a lot of 3 and above drops, so this card can be sung pretty easily in this deck. But I think most times you're going to be singing Friends on the Other Side if you can. All right, now in the bottom half here, we've got Samuel Cahill's Amber Amethyst deck. Now, I have an Amber Amethyst deck built, but it is built completely differently from the one that he has here. Mine is very, very loaded in the front end, much more in line with kind of the Amber and Steel deck we saw that took the tournament. This one is very heavily loaded in that 3-drop spot with some top-end stuff here too, so take a look at this. He's running 4 of the Stitch, 4 Pascals. Again, you just don't see Pascal super often. It's that sneaky lore generation, I guess. With Steel being so prevalent and it only being a single lore generation, I do find it kind of odd to see these in the top 8 lists, but It is what it is. He's inkable if you think you're not going to be able to keep him alive for long enough to get value out of him. Simba as a 4 of. I will point out, there's no Lilo in this list at all. I have an old video of mine, talking about Lilo that has recently kind of taken off with people kind of Monday morning quarterbacking it and talking about how it's the best card in Amber. I stand by my original assessment. I don't feel like she is a great card. Definitely not a necessity. I do think she found a home in the current meta, which is great. I think a lot of it has to do with Simba being around, and I do think a lot of it has to do with the fact that Amber is just a very good, aggressive ink color, more so than Lilo being a particularly great 1-drop. So I did think it was interesting that this deck has the ability to run her and just opted not to. We do have Facilier as a 4 of. The ability to have that 4 willpower and be able to challenge for 2, being inkable as well. Not a huge fan of this Facilier, especially since I don't think he's running the bigger Facilier to shift up into. I just don't like that 0 strength for the swing back. I think it's going to be very hard to generate 2-for-1s with the character, even with 4 willpower on turn 2. Like, he can't challenge through a Simba. He can't, challenge and then hit something back. They're just going to finish him off more often than not. Again, not my first choice for another card in this slot, but he's got in as a 4 of in here. I think most of that, as you're going to see, is this list is trying to capitalize on the Rapunzel draw engine. So that 4 willpower is probably why he's in the list, to be able to challenge and then heal on the back end of that. It does have Mickey Mouse. I'm actually a big fan of this Mickey Mouse. I think for me, in my aggro deck, my Amber Emerald aggro deck, I ended up swapping the Cheshire Cats out for the Mickey Mouses. I've adjusted the list now to where I have both of them in there and as a certain number of, but I think just initially he does about what Cheshire Cat does normally anyways, which is going to be trading even for smaller characters, but allows you to actually have a character that can challenge, which the Cheshire Cat cannot. He does take out Simbas and survives. It's not a bad spot to be in for those, but I've definitely come around to Mickey Mouse. I think I was originally not very impressed with him, but that 2 Lord generation through 3 body on 3 is just a nice place for Amber. Mr. Shmee here, I've talked about him before too, as kind of being that counter to the, not counters per se, but just very good against the aggro decks, similar to this Dr. Facilier up here. I'm assuming he's just in here because he's got a very high willpower, allows you to trade into a character, take 2 or 3 damage and not really be in threat of dying, and then come in with a Rapunzel afterwards and heal that up. Elsa, Snow Queen here. A decent willpower for the deck here, but mostly going to be in here to shift up into the bigger Elsa, possibly tapping down or exerting characters so that you have somebody to challenge with your Mr. Shmee or Dr. Facilier in case they're playing back so that those engines aren't enabled. So it kind of allows you to force the situation. 4 copies of Maleficent, again, no surprise. 4 copies of Rafiki. I think the first list maybe we've seen that are run the full 4 set of Rafiki. Again, big fan of Rafiki and his ability to slow down aggro decks very quickly. He is running 4 copies of Rapunzel, which is what this deck seems to be focused entirely upon, is her draw engine. Obviously using purple, using Amethyst draw engine and Rapunzel, this deck looks like it can generate just an absolute ton of card draw, which leads us to the 4 of as the Jafar. Probably the first deck that I've seen where I'm like, yeah, it needs this Jafar in it, because it really is just focused on drawing as many cards as humanly possible, making this thing probably a 7 to 8 power character a lot of times. Because I mean, I've had played against similar decks like this where they play back-to-back Rapunzels, drawing 2 cards, then 3 cards, then 2 cards, and just keeps the chain going. Feels pretty good in a game where you don't draw a lot of cards for a deck like this. But one of the few decks where I could absolutely see Jafar, Keeper of Secrets, just consistently being a very large strength 2-lore generator. Stitch, not a surprise here. This deck is all about drawing cards, so we've got another legendary in the deck that draws cards. 2 or more characters in play, you can draw 2 cards. His stat line is nothing to shake a stick at either. 4/8 is quite large for a 7-drop. 2-lore generation's not horrible. And he's got those as 3 of in his deck. And then only running the 2 of the Elsa, Spirit of Winter. Doesn't draw a card. This is probably why he didn't leave it in the deck. But in seriousness, like this card here, the deck really isn't a control deck in the traditional sense. It's not running a lot of the control options, especially since Amber doesn't really have any. It is a big draw deck that is probably just looking to overwhelm your opponent by constantly playing stuff every single turn, inking stuff every single turn, and just being able to do that because it's drawing so many cards throughout. Obviously running, 4 of You Have Forgotten Me. If you've got a ton of hand advantage, you want to make it even more lopsided by making your opponent discard 2 cards. I do get a lot of people that still think this card makes you and your opponent discard 2 cards. It is just your opponent. You are trading 1 card, this one, from your hand to get 2 cards out of your opponent's hand. A lot of times if you play this on curve, especially if your opponent went first, they're going to be down to like 3, possibly even 2 cards in their hand when you play this, which makes that very, very nice if you can hit that on curve. A lot of aggro decks are going to unload their hands very quickly, so if you can hit this early in the game, it can absolutely just cripple those aggro decks. Even some control decks, especially like the Ruby Amethyst decks, if they don't play a Maleficent on turn 3 or Sing Friends on the Other Side on turn 4, a lot of times this card will completely shut them down as well. Their songs, he's playing 3 of Part of Your World. Again, probably just to get the Rapunzels back and draw more cards. 4 of Friends on the Other Side. Again, no secrets there. Not a huge fan of this card in most decks, but this deck is very, very centered on the Rapunzel engine going. So being able to recycle Rapunzel and get her back again and refill your hand is definitely worth 1 card and 3 ink in a lot of situations. And the fact that you can sing this card with a good chunk of your deck is also very nice. All right, next one up, we got Brandon Bremont's Amethyst Steel list. The second Amethyst Steel list we've seen on here, but very different Amethyst Steel deck from the original we looked at. He is running both Captain Hook and Prince Eric, still opting to not run the 1-drop Archimedes or the Goons. Just opting for the ones that have kind of the more favorable trades for challengers. I'm telling you now, like a lot of times against the super aggro decks that are in the format, you can just drop a Captain Hook or a Prince Eric and they'll just sit there and stare at you because they don't want to lose the extra value generated for these. I will warn you though, not to go crazy by playing like multiples of these. A lot of times just one is enough to slow them down, enough to get to your next wave, and you don't really want to be losing too many inkable cards out of your hand early on. He is running full 4 set of the small Elsas here. Again, the Exert isn't as important in these particular builds because they're not really worried about challenging favorably with this. We're really just trying to slow our opponents down when possible. So, but her allowing the Elsa to come down on 6 is a big reason why she's in here. Maleficent as a 4 of, again, draws cards. They do run the full package for the Tinkerbell. Again, keep something in mind too, even if you can't get the Big Tink on 4, her ability to draw a card and then choose and discard is not terrible either, especially in decks like these that run a lot of uninkable cards. So if you get a hand that's a little clogged up with a bunch of uninkables, her being able to draw a card and then pitch one of those uninkables is kind of nice as well. He is running 3 of the Jafar, Keeper of Secrets. And again, I know I said it earlier in the list, I don't like them in this list. My Steel Amethyst list that I play, very, very rarely do I have extra cards in my hand to make this guy sizable in any size, shape, or form. I mean, there are a few games out of, maybe 100 that you'll play where you're just like, oh, I've got like 7 cards because everything's just going right. but even with a lot of card draw going on, you're inking every single turn to get to your late game, and you're usually playing something every single turn to hold off their early game, which usually does not equate to having very many cards in hand. So having this guy as a 3 of is, again, not something that I would do. He does have the Queen as a 3 of. Again, like I said, you either love it or hate this card. I think I'm currently running it as a 2 of, and could honestly see myself cutting it entirely. Just not a ton of value other than being inkable, and that turn 5 is kind of just a weird spot in general. Like, very rarely do you want to play her on turn 5, but truth be told, like, that's the turn. If you're going to play her, you need to play her. Beast as a 4 of, again, for that control matchup, he's very good, being able to break their items, and decent sized stats, again, to come in afterwards. Tinkerbell as a 4 of on the big Tink, again, just absolutely hoses the aggro matchups. Being able to shift onto her on 4 is huge as well. He is running Facilier as a 1 of. I've seen this sneak into a couple lists, and I've considered it at 7 and uninkable, especially not running anything for him to shift into lower. I think I'd just rather have another Ursula in the build. There's not a, it just feels very much win more. Like, if you've got cards that are worth bouncing and returning to your hand, and the ability to challenge with them, and 7 to play this 1 copy of Facilier, like, things are probably going pretty well for you anyways, and that card could probably just about be anything that you're playing that turn, and isn't going to matter. Again, there are scenarios that you can make for absolutely any card in the game, but just not enough frequency for me to want to include him in my list. He is playing Ursula at 2 of, which again is where I've kind of settled at for my build as well. Playing Elsa as a 4 of. Again, it's kind of self-explanatory on what she is in the deck for. He does run the 2 copies of the Maui, and I have actually started running 2 copies of Maui as well. I haven't actually, I think more than once, possibly even played this Maui. Against the control matchups, it is another particularly large character that they have to deal with, and he's inkable against all the other matchups. He does just end up being inkable more often than not. Playing these 6 right here, you're almost always going to have one of these in your hand, and generally going to be better than playing him. He really only comes into effect once you've kind of exhausted these in those longer control matchups, but even then, doesn't happen super often. You can take it or leave it probably, but it is interesting to see and play with Maui and they actually constructed a viable deck. He is running the 4 copies of Smash. I do tend to favor the 4 copies of Smash just because they are inkable over the Fire of the Cannons, even if they are a little costly. Songs, he's running 4 of Friends on the Other Side. Again, not any surprises there. And 4 copies of the Grab Your Sword for those aggro matchups. There are a few times, too, where this can come in handy for those control matchups, but they usually require multiples. Singing a card and playing the second copy so that you can kind of sweep their whole side for 4. But if you're drawing enough cards, it's not out of the realm of possibilities. Then we get into our items. Again, he is not running any Cauldron, instead going full Magic Mirror as a 3 of, and 3 of the White Rabbit's Pocket Watch. Again, these are more of a preference choice. I don't know that I can say one way is right or wrong. I think personally, I'm running 1 Magic Mirror, 2 Cauldrons, and I think 2 Watches right now. So, all right, we're getting into our last 2 lists here. We've got Hung Lee's Ruby Amethyst list. Another control list here. He is running the 4 Archimedes, 2 Faciliers. We've got 3 of them, the Magic Brooms here. He's running 3 of Gaston. He is running 4 of Maleficents, 2 of Rafiki. Again, kind of odd omissions, but again, this is a 70 card deck, I think. So, you got the big brain moves playing over 60 cards. We've got only 2 copies of the Little Aladdin. More often than not, this improvise will come in pretty detrimental to the aggro opponents that you're going against. So I do find that I like these as a 4 of. Now, stats-wise, he's clearly not changing much in the game, but that loss of one lore, especially late in the game where you could possibly play multiples of these in a turn, really does come in handy. I've talked about Jafar a number of times here again. I just don't see a lot of scenarios where he's worth the inclusion. I just rather play other 2 lore generators or other cards in general. We do have Mickey Mouse as a 2 of in here. Again, kind of talked about on the last list. It just not interaction that you're going to see a whole lot of running this as a 2 of in the list. Queen, he does have his queens at a 3 of. Again, a more heavily draw focused build here. He is running Goofy for his evasive 5-drop, 4 of Maui, hero to all. And then running his 7-drop Aladdins as a 3 and 3 split. Or sorry, he's running 7-drop Aladdins as a 3 of. Again, not running the full 4 of. I'm not sure why. Being inkable and one of the better bombs in the game, bombs in the deck, I would tend to probably err on the side of caution with this as a 4 of. Elsa as a 3 of. Again, probably mostly just due to the fact that she is uninkable. And he has filled out the top end with 2 full sets of Mickey Mouse, Brave Little Tailor, and Maleficent, opting not to play any Ursulas in the top end, and instead just going for the full kind of inkable bomb set here. Now, actions, he's playing Befuddle, again, as a 2 of. We talked about kind of my thoughts on Befuddle in this particular deck. Playing 4 of, and the full 4 set of Dragonfire, and his songs. No surprises here. 4 of and 4 of for Be Prepared and Friends on the Other Side. And getting into his item package, he's actually run 2 Shields of Virtues, 2 Pocket Watches, 2 Cauldrons, and 3 Magic Mirrors. So a very item-heavy list. I don't know if he was expecting to see lots of beasts and really just wanted to have some redundancy in those spots. I think that's a whole lot of items, honestly. I don't know that I would ever see myself playing 9 items in any list, but again, like I said, the lists run a number of these pretty much in all scenarios. That brings us to our last list here, the only Lemon Lime entry on here, and honestly, this is kind of my choice for one of the better decks in the format, so I was surprised to see only one of them in the top 8. But with the inclusion of so many steel decks that look like that may have been here, I could understand how that could have happened. Or maybe there just weren't a ton of lists that were even present. He has run 2 Hey Heys. I'm not thrilled with this particular selection. I mean, I guess it is, a 2 copy and a 1-drop spot, so it's not like it's going to make or break most games. Just that 1-2 stat line can be problematic. You're not challenging a ton in this deck, so his ability to support to create a favorable challenge somewhere else isn't super relevant. Not going to say it's never relevant, but it doesn't happen a lot. You do have 4 of Lilos, 4 of Stitch, and 4 of the Duke of Wesselton. Very important to get a 1-drop down on turn 1 in this game for this particular deck. So kind of maxing out the good 1-drops for those colors. He is running 4 copies of Simba, 4 copies of Flynn Rider, not surprising there. He is running 4 Cheshire Cats and 4 Jaspers, though, and no Mickey Mouse. We kind of talked about that a little bit earlier. Not a fan of that particular combination. Like, if you wanted to include these, but I do think Mickey Mouse in most games is going to be a better option than 1 or 2, if not both, of these particular cards. Now, he is running 4 of Rapunzel, so that could be part of the reason why he's opting for card like Jasper that has the higher willpower. People are going to challenge it and possibly just leave it sit out there till the following turn to challenge it again favorably. Could be, but again, not a huge. Not saying these cards are bad. Just I think Mickey Mouse definitely deserves a spot in these aggro builds. And I personally like him better than these 2 choices. Hades and Rapunzel. Now, these were both in my original build of this list. I have actually opted to not run either of them. And a big reason is the fact that the lore generation's kind of understated for where the deck wants to be. I mean, Rapunzel being a 2 lore generator, is not bad, but when you have her in a color combination that has Hans at the 4-drop spot, you also have Tinkerbell as a 4-drop, which this deck is not running, who's actually harder to deal with, whereas she is very easy to deal with as a 1/5. Hades not being inkable was actually very problematic. Like, you're wanting to play a card on curve every single turn, ideally even getting to a point where you can play multiple characters in a turn, and not having inkable cards when you need them is actually very problematic. You're already going to be running 4 Cusco. You're already going to be running 4 Lilos. Like, there's just not a lot of extra room for additional uninkable cards in that list. So I have to cutting both of these 4-drops, honestly. I just wasn't getting the card draw that I wanted from Rapunzel to make her worth the lower stats. But I can understand the inclusion. And again, that might be part of the inclusion of some of the other choices that she has. But even then, like, if you're on Rapunzel, like, having the Mickey Mouse be able to challenge, very successfully and then play her right afterwards is very nice, where you can't do that with the Cheshire Cat, really. I mean, he can challenge for 0 to take 2 damage to draw 2 cards, but not really where you want to be at. Hans, no real explanation needed. Again, 4-drop that generates 3 lore, which is insane. Cusco, again, should be in every single Emerald deck that you're playing, along with his Mad Hatter counterpoint. You already kind of touched base on both of those earlier. And then we've got Genie on the Job as a 4-of, which is absolutely monstrous. Again, this deck is running a ton of uninkables, and I feel like, based on my experience with the number of uninkables I was running and what I had to cut down on it for it not to be a problem, which I think I'm running 10 now. I just can't imagine that it doesn't become a problem for this deck if you play enough games. Now, I'm not saying you can't play, a whole tournament and it never be an issue, but if you were to sit down and play this game 100 times, I think more often than you would think, running this many uninkables in an aggressive deck is just going to be problematic. He's got 4, 8, 10, 12. I guess we can just go here. 18 uninkables. So I'm guessing we have some other notes best to get into. That's an absolute ton. And again, like I said, just my experience playing this deck, the more I play it, the more uninkables I take out of the deck. But for Genie on the Job, I'm a big fan of Genie, just probably not being able to support 4-of. He is playing John Silver. Kind of talked about him earlier. I would love to get him into my list, but even with me only playing 10 uninkables, it's very rare that I get to 6 without it just being the last turn and finishing off with a Genie on the Job. He is running 2-of You Have Forgotten Me, which is not surprising. I have actually bumped this up to a 4-of in my particular list. Again, it's usually ink, but if you can hit it on curve in the right matchups, it can absolutely just shut your opponent down very early in the game. He is running 4-of Mother Knows Best. I originally was running 4-of, cut it down to a 2-of, and eventually have just cut it all together. Again, there were just a number of times where, like, you would mulligan your opening hand to get some uninkables out, and you would end up drawing, a Genie and a Mother Knows Best, and then a 7-card hand to have 2 cards not inkable. Like, it really does hinder a deck that plays like this. So, but I'm glad he did well with it. I'm glad it was in the top 8. With this particular one, just my personal experience with this deck, that is, you just absolutely cannot succeed consistently with 18 non-inkables in it going over a long tournament. All right, so let's take a look at what this meta breakdown actually looks like given these results. 6 out of 8 decks contained Amethyst as one of the ink choices. I think this has become the go-to color for Control, just due to all the actual card draw and the very large top end for this deck. I think it just kind of pairs very naturally with anyone looking to play kind of a longer game and disrupt their opponents. Second, we had Amber and Steel being the next most prevalent at 3 each. I do feel like Amber is kind of the go-to color for aggro decks that are looking to be fast. The 2-drop Simba being able to protect and slow down the control options for the first few turns is very, very nice for helping to generate some additional lore. The supplement colors are usually there to help close out the games versus the slower decks. In the case of Steel, we find that Steel has become kind of a supplemental control color, a way to kind of have a faster control option, and cards like Whole New World to disrupt some of the more traditional Ruby Amethyst control builds. Sapphire was the only ink not represented in the top 8. Now, I don't know the full breakdown of this tournament. I don't know how many people actually took Sapphire, but Sapphire has been underperforming in a lot of these tournament results. Ironically enough, I think Sapphire has a very good matchup against the Steel builds that we're starting to see. So if Steel does become more prevalent, we may see Sapphire having a little bit more success. I do think it is a bad matchup for the Ruby builds, just due to the removal that it is playing, ramping them into their late game even faster. But I do think it has some potential with Steel becoming more prevalent to make a niche for itself in the meta as well. Looking at our legendary representation in the meta currently, we had 16 copies of Elsa on the 5 decks that she was in. That is a huge representation out of a top 8 field. She was in all but one of the deck lists that contained Amethyst. Just a very strong, very popular card. We've seen a price increase for her since the set has released. Now, I definitely underestimated her in my initial ranking of the legendaries. I just did not think that card draw alone would be enough to get a deck consistently to turn 8. Turns out it is. If you can disrupt the early game enough, you can get to 8 on card draw alone, which has made her a very, very nice top-end target for most decks. We had 8 copies of Maleficent in 2 decks. Both Ruby control lists were running a max number of 4 of both of these, in both of those lists, rather. The card being inkable has very few drawbacks. If you make it to the late game, she has a very, very favorable cost ratio. Coming in, immediately banishing a character, 7 strength and a 2 lore generation body left on the board afterwards. Just a very favorable card if you can get to her with being inkable, very little drawbacks. We also had 8 copies of Rapunzel in 2 of the Amber decks that were in the top 8. We're running full 4 copies of her as well. A card that I've actually been cool on lately has been Rapunzel. Both lists look to be built to maximize her effect rather than just kind of throwing her in any old Amber list. They had seemed to make some character choices specifically based on being able to stick around after being damaged. So interested to see with a little bit of testing if that is worth kind of tuning a deck to be built around Rapunzel. We also had 6 copies of Mickey Mouse Brave Little Tailor in the 2 Ruby decks that we saw in the top 8. This is a card that has been omitted from a lot of the Ruby lists, so interesting that it showed up in both of the top 8 lists for this particular tournament. A lot of times they just have enough already in the top end spots that there's just not room for this one. They did find it and included it in this one. They had the Goofy Evasive as well. So it was interesting to see that both the Ruby list opted for an Evasive package. There were 5 copies of John Silver in 2 decks. This is probably the most surprising one on the list for me. This is definitely a card I had kind of stopped testing recently. At 6 in Emerald, I'm just usually looking to be closing out the game, so I had not really looked at John Silver as an option. May look into him and kind of do some more testing with him just to see if he's got a spot in this current meta, or if he was just kind of in there for some additional flavor. And then 3 copies of Ursula in 2 of the Amethyst decks that were present. I am surprised to see this low as it is. This is definitely a card that had been creeping up in popularity. So I'm not sure if this particular top 8 is representative of where she's at right now in the meta as far as how many copies you can expect to see if you go out there. I do think she is a little bit more popular than just this here. Most Amethyst builds that I'm seeing are running her as at least a 2 of, if not more, some of them going up to 3 copies of Ursula. I think she just helps with those aggro matchups, getting down a turn earlier than Elsa if you have to pay them for full cost, being able to reduce their lore, especially in tandem with the Ruby list that are running Aladdin. I just think she's probably more representative in the regular meta than we saw in this tournament. But for this tournament, there were only 3 copies of her present in those top 8 lists.
So there you guys have it. There's my breakdown and analysis of the top 8 deck lists from Denver. Let me know what you guys think of these deck lists down in the comments below. And until next time, guys, Hobby Hero out.